Spring 1945, the sky over Tokyo. A Japanese fighter pilot climbed toward the enemy bombers, as he had done many times before, and then he saw something that made no sense at all. Down below the great silver bombers, and mixed among them, were smaller aircraft. Single-engine fighters, fast, sleek, unmistakably American, and for a moment his mind simply refused to accept it because it was impossible. A fighter is a short-legged thing. It cannot fly across an ocean. The enemy's nearest airfields were more than 1,000 miles away, far beyond the reach of any single-engine fighter ever built. Bombers could make that terrible journey. Fighters could not. That was the one thing the men of the home defense had always been able to count on. The bombers would come alone, unescorted, because no fighter on Earth could reach this far. And yet there they were, American fighters over the capital of Japan, turning to meet him. In that instant, before the fighting even began, the pilot understood something far worse than the odds of the dogfight he was about to lose. If American fighters were over Tokyo, then the distance that had always protected the home islands was gone. The enemy was no longer far away across the sea. The enemy was at the door. And the war, whatever the newspapers and the officers still said, was already over. Before I get into it, a little backstory. My dad fought in the Second World War, and growing up, he told me stories about it all the time. And the more I listened, the more one thing fascinated me. Not what our side did, but what it looked like from the other side. The men who were supposed to win, what they saw, what they were told, and the moment they realized none of it was true. So that's how I like to tell these stories, through the eyes of the enemy who couldn't stop us. And now here I am, passing on the stories I learned to you. To understand the horror of that moment, you have to understand the shield that Japan had trusted for its entire history. Distance. Japan is an island nation at the far edge of a vast ocean. For centuries, that ocean had been its greatest defender. To reach Japan, an enemy had to cross thousands of miles of open water, and no one ever had. The sheer distance made the home islands feel not just safe, but sacred, untouchable, protected by geography, and many believed by the gods themselves. Even as the war turned against Japan, even as island after island fell in the Pacific, there remained a deep, unspoken faith that the homeland itself, and above all the capital, was somehow beyond the enemy's true reach. The first crack in that faith came with the bombers. By late 1944, the Americans had captured islands far out in the Pacific and begun to build airfields there. And from those airfields rose the largest bombers the world had ever seen. Enormous, high-flying, pressurized machines that could carry their loads across more than 1,000 miles of ocean, strike the home islands, and return. When they first appeared over Japan, it was a profound shock. The sacred homeland could be reached after all, but even then there was a strange, cold comfort in the details, and Japan's air defenses clung to it. The bombers came from very far away, and that great distance, which was terrifying, was also a kind of protection. Because while a bomber could make that enormous journey, a fighter could not. The bombers had to come alone, unescorted, with no little fighters to guard them, because no fighter had the range to fly all that way to Japan and all the way back. And that meant that Japan's own fighters rising up to defend the homeland faced only the bombers. They could climb up among those big machines and attack them without an enemy fighter escort waiting to pounce. The bombers took losses. Japanese pilots died attacking them, but they could get at them. The distance that let the bombers reach Japan was the very same distance that kept their fighter escorts away. It was Japan's last shield, and the home defense trusted it completely. The Americans knew about that shield too, and they set out with characteristic patience and ruthlessness to destroy it. Not with some wonder weapon, but with two of the most unglamorous things in the entire war: a small island and a fuel tank. The island was a tiny, ugly volcanic rock, roughly halfway between the American bomber bases and Japan. It had almost nothing on it worth wanting, except its position and the fact that from it a shorter-legged aircraft could reach the home islands. The Americans wanted it desperately for exactly that reason, and they paid one of the most horrific prices of the entire Pacific War to take it. A battle so savage it became a legend of its own. But when the smoke cleared, they had it. and now they had an airfield much closer to Japan, close enough to change everything. The second thing was even humbler. The drop tank. It was nothing more than an extra fuel tank made to hang under the wings or belly of a fighter, filled with the fuel the fighter would need to reach the target, and then simply dropped away and abandoned once it was empty or once combat began. It was cheap. It was disposable. It was about as far from a glamorous secret weapon as you could imagine. And it was the thing that finally erased Japan's last shield. Because with drop tanks slung beneath its wings, flying from that captured island halfway across, the finest American fighter of the war could now reach all the way to Tokyo and all the way home again. And what a fighter it was. Fast, beautifully built, heavily armed, able to fly at speeds and heights that Japan's tired, worn defenders could not match. It had been designed as an escort fighter, made to fly enormous distances alongside the bombers and protect them the whole way, and now from that little island with those disposable tanks, it could do exactly that over the skies of Japan itself. So on a spring day in 1945, the impossible happened. American fighters appeared over Tokyo. For the Japanese pilots who rose to meet them, it was the end of the one advantage they had left. They had spent months attacking the bombers, and now when they climbed up to do it again, they found the bombers guarded. Swarms of fast American fighters flew at the bombers now, waiting for the defenders, and the defenders had to fight through them just to get a shot at the bombers behind. And these were not the green, exhausted formations Japan could still field by 1945. They were experienced men in superb machines, well-fed, well-trained, with fuel to spare and a whole industrial nation behind them. Japan, by contrast, was scraping the bottom. Its best pilots were long dead, many of them in the very kinds of flimsy aircraft we have talked about before. Its fuel was so short that new pilots barely got the hours to learn to fly, let alone to fight. The men who went up to defend Tokyo were often boys with a few hours of training in worn-out planes against the best fighter force in the world. The result was not a battle, it was a slaughter. The American fighters roamed the skies over Japan almost as they pleased, shooting down the defenders, strafing the airfields, hunting anything that tried to rise against the bombers. The shield of distance was gone, and behind it there was almost nothing left to stop them. But the true damage was not in the numbers of planes shot down. It was in what the sight meant to every soldier and every civilian who looked up and saw those fighters wheeling over the Capitol. Everyone understood without needing to be told what it signified. Bombers, coming from far away, were a horror, but a distant one. Fighters were different. A fighter is a short-ranged creature. It stays near its base. If enemy fighters were dancing over Tokyo, then the enemy's reach now extended right over the heart of the empire. The distance was gone. The ocean had stopped protecting them. The sacred homeland was sacred no longer, and the gods, whatever anyone had believed, were plainly not going to turn these aircraft away. The Japanese pilot climbing to meet those first Mustangs had grasped it in a heartbeat. He might fight bravely. He might even, with great luck, bring one down. And it would change nothing, because the appearance of that fighter over his capital was proof of a defeat far larger than any single dogfight. It was proof that the enemy had solved the last problem, crossed the last barrier, and could now bring the full weight of its power directly over the homeland day after day, with nothing left to seriously oppose it. And here, once again, is the quiet lesson underneath the whole thing. Japan had trusted in distance, and in spirit and in the idea that the homeland was somehow beyond reach. It was a belief, and beliefs do not stop airplanes. The Americans did not outbelieve them. They did the patient, ruthless, unglamorous work. They took a worthless volcanic island at a terrible price because of where it sat. They hung cheap disposable fuel tanks under the wings of their fighters. And with a rock and a tank, they reached out and erased the one advantage Japan had left and put their fighters over Tokyo. That was the American way of war in a single image. Not a magic weapon, not a braver spirit, but the relentless solving of one problem after another, with industry and logistics and sheer stubborn reach until there was no distance left to hide behind and no shield left to trust. The Japanese airman had been told the homeland could never be truly reached. He learned the truth on the day he climbed into the sky over his own capital and found the enemy already there, waiting for him 1,000 miles from where any fighter was ever supposed to be able to fly. He had trusted the ocean to protect him, and the enemy had simply built a bridge across it out of a captured rock and a fuel tank he could drop in the sea, and flown straight over everything he thought would keep him safe.